Good morning, John. It's Friday. A few weeks ago, a company called Visually emailed me and was like, "Hey, Hank, if you could do a high-quality animated video on any issue in the world, what would you choose?" Now, that was a hard choice, but I went with incarceration in America because it is messed up. Now, crime is also messed up. Bad things happen to good people, and that's terrible, and something should be done about it. Well, we send people to prison to be punished, and to prevent them from doing bad things again, and to deter others from breaking the law. Punishment, corrections, and deterrence. Now, we have this habit of thinking of prisoners as something very external to society. After all, there are literal walls between them and society, walls capped with razor wire and watched over by people with guns. But millions of prisoners are released each year. Today's prisoners are tomorrow's neighbors, so corrections should probably be the most important piece of the incarceration pie. Unfortunately, it is not. We are, however, really good at punishment. America has about 4% of the world's people and about 25% of the world's incarcerated people. We have the highest incarceration rate in the world. Over the last 30 years, that number has skyrocketed, increasing over 400%. 41% of American juveniles and young adults have been arrested by the time they turn 23. Children as young as 13 years old have been sentenced to die in prison. And our prisons violate international standards. Solitary confinement increases instability and violence in inmates and is considered by international law to be torture. But in America, it's not regulated by anyone except the prison officials. No judge, no jury. Arguably the most devastating form of punishment we enact in this country, and yet there is no appeals process. And you think it's hard to get a job in America? Well, we make it intentionally more difficult to get a job once you have a conviction on your record, not to mention just to live your life. Convicts are ineligible for welfare, student loans, public housing, food stamps, and are often socially disconnected from community and family support structures. So in addition to having high recidivism rates, they have very high rates of homelessness and suicide. Somewhere along the way, we started to think that being tough on crime meant being tough on criminals, but that's not the same thing. Punishment is only one piece of a much larger crime reduction pie, and it's an expensive one, with some institutions paying more than $100,000 per year per prisoner. Long prison sentences have helped to decrease crime, but no more than 25% of the decrease we've seen can be attributed to incarceration, and it costs far beyond just dollars. The cost is to people, to our country, to communities, to families, and to ourselves. The policy seems to be, if you've committed a felony, we just give up on you. These wars on crime, wars on drugs, they are wars on people. The smart political move is to appear tough on crime because crime is scary, so we increased minimum sentences, we arrested more people, we sent more of them to prison. That's how we looked tough on crime, but the results are in. It's bad policy. It's cruel, it's short-sighted, and to continue this policy of mass incarceration would be foolish. We're living inside of a massive $75 billion per year failed experiment. 2010 was the first year in nearly 40 years that the number of incarcerated individuals in America did not increase. Policymakers are beginning to realize the magnitude of this failure, but there is a long way to go. John, I'll see you on Tuesday.
Between 1970 and 2005, the US's prison population grew by a massive 700%, far outpacing both population growth and crime rates. Today, it's got to the stage where America is home to 5% of the world's population, but a quarter of the world's prisoners. And not only does America have the highest imprisonment rates of any country in the entire world, but it also has the highest rate of youth incarceration. Over 130,000 juveniles are detained in the US every year, and on any given day there are more than 70,000 youths in detention. But the biggest winners of this mass incarceration haven't been the American public, but the private prison companies who are making giant profits out of people being in jail. According to the American Civil Liberties Union, in 2010, the two largest prison companies alone received nearly $3 billion in revenue, while their top executives each received annual compensation packages worth more than $3 million. Private prisons didn't really exist before the early 1980s, when US states and the federal government needed a solution to the overcrowding in public prisons. But between 1990 and 2009, the number of people in private prisons increased by a massive 1,600%. And the business model of these private prison companies essentially depends on locking more and more people up. The biggest of the US's private prison companies is the Corrections Corporation of America, otherwise known as the CCA. In its 2010 annual report to shareholders, the CCA stated, "The demand for our facilities and services could be adversely affected by the relaxation of enforcement efforts, leniency in conviction or parole standards and sentencing practices, or through the decriminalisation of certain activities that are currently proscribed by our criminal laws." The CCA seems to be particularly concerned about the decriminalisation of drug use and any potential changes to immigration laws. For instance, any changes with respect to drugs and controlled substances or illegal immigration could affect the number of persons arrested, convicted and sentenced, thereby potentially reducing demand for correctional facilities to house them. Because of these concerns, private prison companies spend a lot of money on lobbying politicians.
According to analysis by the Associated Press, between 2002 and 2012, the CCA, along with the US's second and third largest private prison companies, Geo Group Inc. and Management and Training Corporation, otherwise known as MTC, spent around $45 million on lobbying state and federal governments between them.
And in addition to lobbying, these three companies also pour hundreds of thousands of dollars every year into the election campaigns of governors, state legislators and judges.
And a report by the National Institute on Money and State Politics revealed that between 2003 and 2011, the CCA alone hired 199 lobbyists in 32 states, while GEO hired 72 lobbyists in 17 states.
Worryingly, private prisons in America have been linked to numerous cases of violence and poor conditions.
This CCTV video shows a brutal beating of 24-year-old Hani Elebed by another inmate at the CCA-run Idaho Correctional Center in January 2010. Elebed was left with permanent brain damage from the attack and later died in 2012, though it was unclear whether his death was related to the injuries he sustained in prison. Following the attack on Elebed, the American Civil Liberties Union filed a lawsuit against the CCA on behalf of a number of inmates at the centre. The inmates claimed that violence at the centre was so widespread they called it Gladiator School, and that understaffing and mismanagement by CCA officials was contributing to the violence rates. The CCA denied these claims, but agreed to a settlement in which they were instructed to carry out operational changes and increase staffing levels. However, more than 2 years later, in September 2013, a federal judge found the CCA in contempt of court for violating this settlement. And then the following month, the CCA announced that it would be leaving Idaho. The ACLU has also filed a lawsuit against the state of Mississippi over conditions at the East Mississippi Correctional Facility. Donald Weeks is a former prisoner at the facility, which was run by GEO until July 2012 and is now run by MTC.
It was run by GEO the first 2 months that I was there. Just dirty, nasty, unsanitary conditions. I mean, people get stabbed in there, they're bleeding, or they get in a fight and they're bleeding. They don't give no cleaning chemicals to clean the place up or nothing. The sewer kept backing up in the zones, the toilets kept stopping up. Stench was so bad in there, I couldn't eat anymore.
A spokesperson for MTC says that conditions have significantly improved since the company took over from GEO, but the ACLU disputes this.
This track record is all the more worrying because many of those in private prisons are some of the most vulnerable people in the system. Nearly 40% of all detained juveniles are committed to private facilities, while nearly half of all immigrant detainees are now held by private companies. And to be clear, most immigrant detainees are being held while waiting to have their cases decided in court. not serving time for a crime they've been convicted of committing.
In 2012, a federal judge transferred all prisoners out of the formerly GEO-managed Walnut Grove Youth Correctional Facility in Mississippi after finding it to be a picture of such horror as should be unrealized anywhere in the civilized world.
Prison staff had sex with imprisoned youths in what investigators called among the worst we've seen in any facility in the nation.
According to GEO, the abuses documented occurred before the company had taken over Walnut Grove in late 2010, but this is disputed by the US Justice Department.
This map, produced by the ACLU following a Freedom of Information request, also shows allegations of sexual abuse of detainees since 2007 at immigration detention facilities across the US. In total, there have been nearly 200 reports of sexual abuse during this time, but the ACLU believes that this is just the tip of the iceberg and that many other cases have gone unreported. Unfortunately for the private prison companies, however, crime rates in the US have actually been on the decrease for the past decades, and so they've been resorting to more aggressive tactics to make money. A 2013 report from the In the Public Interest Resource Centre revealed that some companies have been signing contracts with states that contain clauses guaranteeing high prison occupancy rates. Some contracts require 90 to 100% occupancy. This means that if the private prisons in question aren't filled to the agreed capacity, then either the state has to find more people to put in those prisons or pay the company for the unused beds. And 3 companies in Pennsylvania even resorted to bribing officials to get beds in their facilities filled. In August 2011, former Luzerne County Judge Mark Chivarella Jr. was sentenced to 28 years in prison after sending children to detention centres owned by these companies in return for illegal payments amounting to millions of dollars. Some of those he sentenced were as young as 10 years old. And now, campaign groups like the ACLU and Brave New Foundation fear that private prison companies could be set to profit from federal immigration reform. The US House Judiciary Committee has passed the SAFE Act, which, if turned into law, would turn millions of undocumented immigrants into criminals overnight and make not having papers punishable by months or even years in US prisons. But if business starts to go bad for the private prison companies in the US, then there's always the rest of the world. The UK currently has a 106% prison occupancy rate, creating an opportunity for private prison companies to jump in as they did in the US in the 1980s, while Australia's controversial immigration detention system is now operated entirely by private companies. And last year, GEO saw 14% of its revenues coming from international contracts.
Adam, you got me into this? No, you get me out!
I promise, I have someone working on it. But in the meantime, this is a great opportunity to explain why our nation's prison system is a failure on every level.
So you know a lot about prison? I bet you watch a lot of PBS documentaries, huh?
I guess you're right, I do like first-hand knowledge. Oh, maybe you could help me do this episode?
Sure, nothing better to do.
Whoa, do you have magic TV powers like Adam?
Nope, but I got a lot of favors.
Early lunch today. Early lunch today, everyone.
America's prison system is a total mess. Whatever purpose you think it serves, it ain't doing it.
Well, the point of prison is to reduce crime.
It's definitely not doing that. There are 2.2 million people incarcerated in the U.S., 10 times more than 50 years ago.
2 million is more than the population of some states.
Welcome to mass incarceration, Massachusetts. Our primary export, shivs. Our secondary export, God.
Hey, that's contraband.
But despite this massive increase in the prison population, a study conducted by the NYU School of Law found that the effect on the crime rate has been essentially zero.
Zero? Then why do we lock so many people up?
Well, I can't speak for all prisons, but this one is here to make money.
Make money? You mean someone is profiting from all this?
Yep, these guys are.
It all started in the tough on crime 80s, when the war on drugs meant state and federal prisons were bursting at the seams.
So many prisoners, what do we do?
Let corporate America handle your prisons. We'll take care of everything, save you a few bucks, and skim a little off the top.
Well, businesses running prisons? That sounds a little fishy. Just kidding. I mean, hey, if it saves money, right?
And so the Corrections Corporation of America, or CCA, was born.
Okay, hold on. You can't just sell prisons like they're cars or real estate or hamburgers.
Then why don't you tell that to Tom Beasley, the co-founder of CCA, who once said, you just sell prisons like you were selling cars or real estate or hamburgers.
CCA, can I take your order?
I'll have a number 7 with extra solitary cells, electric fence, and small onion ring.
Like to Supermax that?
Yeah, I'll Supermax it.
And they rake in a ton of scratch. Last year, CCA took in $1.7 billion.
Business is so good, it's criminal.
Well, you know, maybe it's okay because they're saving the taxpayer money.
Sorry, the sales pitch was wrong. The data shows that private prisons cost the taxpayers just as much as regular prisons.
And today, nearly 1/5 of federal prisoners are held in a for-profit facility.
Okay, no. Ah, graffiti. That's an infraction. A beautiful one. Are you Banksy?
Oh my gosh, I already got an infraction? They must give out a lot of these.
Oh yeah, that's not a coincidence.
One study showed that private prisons dole out twice as many infractions as government prisons.
Not having enough infractions. That's an infraction.
These penalties can lengthen your sentence, which earns the company even more cash.
Oh, so the more people that are in prison, the more money they make. Ooh, that's dirty.
Yep, that's why private prisons sneak occupancy clauses into their contracts, which actually require states to keep prisons full.
Last year, a private prison in Arizona didn't make their 97% capacity quota, so the state government had to pay them a $3 million fine.
Fines like that incentivize cash-strapped states to keep people in prison as long as possible.
Your parole forms are in order, and you've been a model prisoner. So we're going to lock you back up. We really can't afford to pay another fine.
That's reprehensible.
Look, not all prisons are private prisons, but this one is. So no, its purpose isn't to stop crime.
It's the dollar bills, y'all.
Can't believe all this has been happening and I didn't even know. I mean, I've never thought about prison like at all.
Hey, pulling back the curtain on our disturbing business practices, that's an infraction. Hey, that makes 3 infractions. You're gonna go to solitary.
Okay, that doesn't sound so bad. You know, peace and quiet, do some meditating.
No, solitary confinement is a cruel and inhumane punishment that has no place in modern society.
Wait, what?
We'll tell you about it after you get settled in the hole.
No, tell me now!
Solitary confinement has devastating effects on prisoners' mental health.
In solitary, you're kept alone for 23 hours a day, in a room the size of a king-size bed.
Well, that doesn't sound so bad. Me and Murph share a queen. Wait, where are those voices coming from? Oh no, oh gosh, I'm seeing things.
It's an archaic and cruel form of punishment that started in the 1800s.
Something to watch, I guess.
Solitary confinement was conceived by Quakers who thought prisoners would use the time to reflect and study the Bible.
You know, I've been meaning to read this.
But even they decided it was too cruel to use. The Supreme Court at the time declared,
prisoners subject to solitary confinement became violently insane. Others committed suicide.
Oof, we gotta stop doing this.
Stop!
We did stop. Solitary confinement fell out of use in the US for a century. But a few decades ago, we brought it back, and it's been destroying minds ever since.
Destroying minds? I mean, that sounds a little hyperbolic.
Yeah, maybe. What do I know? I'm just a hallucination.
Hello? Adam? Is anyone here?
Humans are social animals, and a prolonged lack of social contact can cause serious and permanent brain damage. People held in solitary hallucinate, fall into depression, and lose the ability to keep track of how much time has passed.
How long have I been in here? Oh, I'm really losing it.
Emily, you okay in there?
Kendra, oh, thank God. Why am I even here? I thought solitary was for the worst of the worst.
Nope,
Solitary confinement is routinely used in our prison system. It's basically given to anyone the guards don't want to deal with.
The mentally ill. LGBT. I wouldn't eat dinner. We had it coming.
Man, if I'm gonna hallucinate a Tony Award-winning musical, why couldn't it be Hamilton?
Solitary confinement is given to between 80 to 100,000 people a year.
There are actually entire prisons made up of nothing but solitary cells. They're called supermax prisons. Enormous complexes full of people held in tiny cages like animals, slowly being driven insane.
This is Industry Wednesday. Every Wednesday, we analyze a different industry. Today, we're looking at 15 things you didn't know about the private prison industry. In this video, we're going to uncover the 15 things you didn't know about the private prison industry. Every society has kept codes of law for its people since the beginning of time and has punished or detained members of that society for breaking them. In the past few decades, however, there has been a new alarming trend: the private prison industry, and it's a billion-dollar industry. Okay, how about we dive right in and get a better look at the 15 things you didn't know about the private prison industry. Number 1. The United States has the highest number of people in private prisons. The world's largest private jail population is in the USA. Private prisons account for almost 9% of the 1.5 million people incarcerated in prisons nationwide. Australia is right behind them, with about 160 out of every 100,000 people behind bars, and their prison rate keeps going up. However, in private jails in Australia, inmates have a lower suicide rate compared to their English peers. Number 2. Private prisons are money generators, if you can leave your ethics at the door. The government pays private prisons to take care of prisoners so they can save money. If it costs $100 a day to take care of an inmate in a regular government-run prison, and a private company says they can do it for $50 a day, that's a savings for the taxpayer. But at what cost? The reason private prisons are able to care for inmates so cheaply is because they cut necessary items integral to running such an institution, such as regular cleaning, highly trained guards, and therapy care, and they go for the cheapest options. Number 3. Who's making the most money off of privately owned prisons? With a reported income of $1.79 billion, the crown would have to go to Corrections Corporation of America, or CCA, now known as Core Civic. To distance itself from the constant scrutiny of the prison industry, it's still bringing in the big bucks by running over 170 inmate and immigrant detention centers in the United States of America. Number 4. Multiple people are running private prison earnings. An executive at a successful private prison company can expect to rake in about $2 million in earnings, or $2,000 per hour. If you're a corrections officer, plan on living around $15 per hour. As an inmate, you might earn 14 cents to $2 an hour, and most of that would be sent home or used on things like toothpaste from the commissary. And the most purchased item at a commissary? Ready food. Inmates reportedly spend an average of $225 a year on it. Other things they buy include toilet paper. They only get one roll a week from the prison. And things like antifungal cream, which is not provided by the prison and can cost $4 a tube, representing quite a few days of work for just one tube of cream. Number 5. The suicide rate is higher in private prisons. Since a privatized prison system is all about cutting costs, there's very little access to health care and, of course, mental health care. Add that to an already volatile and poorly managed system, and you get a huge jump in suicides. It is estimated that among men, their chance of committing suicide is 6% higher than the general population, and for women, a whopping 20% higher of committing suicide than their general population counterparts. The most often sought-after method in prison? was hanging. Number 6. The financial cost to prisoners can be high too. So, how else does the private prison industry make its money? In addition to government contracts, it charges a pretty penny for families to remain in touch with incarcerated loved ones. Phone companies contracted by the prison can charge as much as $25 for a 10-minute phone call. Commissionary companies are also making a profit on the inmates, raking in millions of dollars per year through the sales of essentials like soap, mouthwash, and other things inmates buy. Number 7. Private prisons are only profitable to the companies that build them, not society. Getting bad guys off the street is definitely a positive thing for any society. It's letting them back out without any reoccurrence of committing a crime that's the problem. Private prisons are notorious for not providing the training in life skills and therapy needed that will prevent prisoners from repeating the mistakes that got them arrested in the first place. Number 8. Private prisons make shady contracts with the governments they are contracting for. It should come as no surprise that the more bodies a private prison has in it, the more profitable it is. After all, it's getting paid per prisoner from the government to take their overflow of prisoners. So why are the beds always full? Well, in their government contracts, private prison companies request a guaranteed quota of prisoners per year. That means that no matter what, if there are new crime prevention programs or strides in the war against drugs, the private prison companies are always guaranteed the same number of inmates from the government. Just let that sink in for a second. Number 9. Bail bond companies also make a significant profit from private prisons. $1.4 million is collected almost every year in bail bonds by private companies from defendants and their families. Remember, not everyone held in prison is guilty. In a lot of cases, they simply could not afford to pay their bail before trial. In addition, these companies regularly lobby the government to keep bonds high in order to make a profit. Number 10. The United Kingdom was the first to use the private prison system. The UK's affair with the private prison system is winding down with a vow they will no longer contract for any new private prisons. But in 1992, they became the first to start contracting out their prison services. In their contracts, the government retains the right to hold payment for poorly run or abusive prisons. As a result, the lure to invest in private prisons in the UK has gone down, and even Scotland has a plan to phase them out completely. Number 11. Judges have taken bribes from private prisons to send them inmates. One of the biggest corruption scandals in the United States was when 2 judges were found to have taken over $2 million in bribes from private prisons to keep feeding the private prison system, sending juveniles to lock up for petty crimes, like stealing a backpack, and before they were even found guilty in a court of law. Number 12. Private prisons are a billion-dollar labor industry. A typical inmate will receive around 14 cents an hour for work within the prison. These prisoners hold jobs manufacturing everything from license plates to clothing and textbooks. The companies that use prison labor will surprise you. A few of them known to use prisoners are Victoria's Secret, Starbucks, Microsoft, and Whole Foods. Not only that, but the federal government itself sells prison labor to private companies. In fact, their latest idea is call centers. The Department of Defense even sent out a brochure to sell this program to companies, calling it the best-kept secret in call centers. So, the next time you're trying to get in touch with customer service, you just might be talking to an inmate. Number 13. Stock in the 2 largest private prison companies went up 140% when Trump was elected. Banking on his stance on immigration and his promises to be tough on crime, investors knew right away this would mean building more facilities to incarcerate or detain people, and indeed the building has begun. In 2017, the Geo Group made $187 million by building and running an ICE, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement Detention Center, and the profits are sure to keep rolling in with the new, stricter immigration laws. The biggest issue reported in these detention centers: medical neglect. ICE is reported to spend $2 billion a year housing detainees in private facilities. Number 14. The United States is now competing with third world countries for clients in the manufacturing industry. Because prison labor is so cheap and largely unregulated, big companies like Unicon, IBM, and Compaq are giving all their businesses to it, getting cheap labor and pumping out things like clothing, keyboards, and circuit boards. Right now, there are inmates in 17 states in the USA on strike for better wages and conditions. Though the strike is not getting a lot of press, it is reported this could be the largest prison strike in history. Number 15. Prisoners need to eat, and companies don't want to pay. Another necessity that private prisons outsource in order to cut costs is food. Large companies like Aramark, who had reported revenues of $114 billion last year, has been known for serving substandard, sometimes maggoty food to private prisons. Their goal after getting a contract is to feed inmates on around $1 per day for all 3 meals. A standard government-run prison spends about $5 for all 3. And as always, for sticking with us all the way to the end, here's your bonus. Number 16. Guantanamo Bay U.S. Naval Base prison in Cuba costs the taxpayer a whopping $800,000 per inmate per year. And now onto a federally run prison, Guantanamo Bay, also known as Gitmo. This famous U.S. Naval Base prison in Cuba costs the taxpayer a whopping $800,000 per inmate per year. How many prisoners are at the Bay? At its peak, it housed over 600 inmates, and as of today, there are roughly 40. The federal government still reports it costs around $445 million per year to keep this very expensive prison open and operational.